Hi parents, and welcome to More Than Just a Picky Eater series. We've been talking about setting the stage for creating a positive feeding environment. So last session, I've introduced 4 pillars to help create such a positive environment. And those pillars were studying your child and keeping the boundaries straight, establishing structure and routine, discovering the power of words. We did talk about studying your child, and the purpose was not that you would assess the child per se. That would be my job. But the idea was to give you a perspective, a slightly different perspective as to why challenging behavior occur around mealtime. It would help you gain that empathy towards your child. It is not just being manipulative. It's not just frustration resulting from the child, left to control. There is definitely some other factors that are contributing to the challenging behavior and some weaknesses and skill deficits. So that was sort of the purpose of studying your child, knowing what kind of weaknesses in the different areas that we've talked about in the very first session that could be contributing to your child challenges at mealtime. Now, today I'm going to be focusing on keeping the boundaries straight. Keeping the boundaries straight is about understanding who does what, when, and where. And to give us a guide, I'm using Ellen Statter's division of responsibility, which is a research-supported model, and it has been not just used for kids who typical kids but just have feeding issues, but also even for kids who have diagnoses like autism. The division of responsibility model goes like this. For toddlers through adolescents. She also does talk about infants, but because we're not really dealing with infants in our school setting, this is the most relevant part of the model. The parent is responsible for what, when, and where. The child is responsible for how much and whether, meaning whether they would eat the item that you are offering them. Parents decide the what. So what does it mean that parents decide the what? That means that you as a parent, your role for mealtime is to expose your child to a variety of food from the family meal. So you're not necessarily creating a new menu for your child. You're not going in and buying things that you don't typically offer for your family for the sake of exposure. What exposure means is you're not limiting your food that you're offering to your picky eater to their tastes and likes only, meaning that at the table, your meal plan, whatever meal you're going to eat as a family, is at the table while your picky eating child is there too. So you're serving a variety of food, variety of levels of fat contents. So if you guys have a day where you're eating, I don't know, pizza and fries or something like that, that's okay. You are, that's part of your family meal plan. I'm not encouraging that you eat junk food all the time. I'm just saying if you're having one day where you say it's a pizza Friday or something like that, then it's offered for all. Let the child pick and choose from what is available from the meal. And then provide at least one familiar food on the menu, but without tailoring or catering or making a special meal plan for your child. So the idea of having one familiar food item at the table is to help your child to make that decision or transition to the dinner table, because now they see at least one thing that they like and they're familiar with. So if you're asking your child, and let's say especially those extreme picky eaters, and you're asking your child to join you at the table, and they look and it's like these casseroles and salads and stuff mixed together, or stuff that have lost their, because typically your picky eater will be able to manage single items, but when you start mixing stuff like in a casserole, that's when it becomes more challenging. But the idea is, don't make it all new, because then they are like, I don't know that, I'm not interested, I'm not coming. If they have one item at least that they can relate to, then at least they know there's something there I could eat. Parents decide the where. Adults and kids will need to eat together. The idea of reinforcing this is to use that time to provide a model for proper utensil use, but also to model social conversation. You're modeling to your child how to behave properly at the table. And by behaving properly, don't necessarily mean you're closing your mouth while you're eating. The idea is, you know how children with picky eating will fuss, they will spit, they will push plates away. So those kind of behaviors are not just manners, they're indicative of more issue. So what you're trying to do is model how we should be behaving at the table. So how do I model for your child if there's something I don't like that I'm being offered? What would be the appropriate way of disclosing that? So that would be an example. No screen time while eating meals and snacks. And we've talked about that for a couple of reasons. We said that it makes it's a distraction technique, right? So the child is not actively involved. So whatever is happening at the table, the child has zoned out. But the other thing that it does, more relevant to the actual feeding problem, is when you're watching while you're eating, your sensory engagement is not, you're not really aware of what's going on. You're in autopilot mode. You're not looking. You're not really touching and enjoying and exploring the food. So that part is taken out. But that's what you need to help the child build their feeding skills. They need to be involved. They need to be making those decisions. They need to be fully aware of the different textures, colors, and tastes, and so on. It's so tempting because you're trying to get your child to eat, but if you look at the long-term consequences, the risks or the harmful effects outweigh the benefits of it. Sometimes we may use it initially just to get the child, but that's in a therapy sort of context where we're using maybe a little bit of distracting techniques, but it never is a long-term solution. It is just maybe used as a transition, and it's used sort of with therapy guidance. So we're not having issues later on how to fade the distraction, because now they're used to having a TV. Now they're going to have behaviors because they're used to having a TV all the time. If you try and withdraw it. Serving food only in the designated location. So a couple of things. A designated location doesn't mean, like a dinner table. If you guys eat at the counter in the kitchen, great. If you have different, like culturally different way for eating, whatever it is, but just make it consistent. It helps them understand and mentally be ready, because it's not a different location all the time. So I know when I am in this area, I'm going to be eating. So it gives them that sort of sense of being prepared for what's coming ahead. But if you have a picky eater who also has the diagnosis of autism, having that one sort of predictable location for eating helps them to make that mind shift that, again, this location is going to be where I'm eating. Consistency with the location help de-escalate the sensory system of the child. So remember when I talked about when a child is having an overwhelming experience because of the food, whether because they don't know how to eat, so a motor issue, or a sensory issue, or pain because of physical issues, or breathing difficulties. So whatever those factors are that are contributing to the feeding problem, what ends up happening is your brain and your nervous system now have gotten used that every time they see food, you are on the alert, you are on the fight flight sort of, it's a danger situation. But having that consistency and predictability over time, what it does, it reduces that sort of hypervigilance about the eating time. So you want to provide that consistency and predictability so the sensory systems of your child are kind of close to the baseline. And by baseline, so let's say baseline is calm, and then you have a sort of a very heightened sensory system, or you could have a sensory system that is kind of needing a little bit of stimulation. So for our kids who are picky eating, the most commonly I see is those kids who are up there. They're very heightened, they're hypervigilant, they're defensive, they're ready to kind of do the fight-flight response. So that consistency helps calm them down. Parents decide the when. Schedule meals and snacks every 2 to 3 hours. Remember we talked about why we are not doing just a 3-meal schedule? Because if you offer only 3 meals for a child, in order for them to meet their caloric needs, that means you'd have to offer them an adult portion plates, and that is not going to work for 2 obvious reasons. Most of the kids don't have the attention span to sit and eat a portion that is an adult size portion for 3 meals. So most likely they're not going to be getting their caloric intake, even and we're talking about typical children. But the other thing too is they have small stomachs. They're not going to be able, even if they have the attention span to sit for 30 minutes or 40 minutes to eat, they don't have the capacity to consume an adult portion in one setting. So what we're doing is we're doing small meals over mini feeding times. In between, however, you want to avoid providing them any sort of food or any caloric drinks, whether we're talking about milk or juice or the like. So the idea is you want to pace it such that by the time it's for the next meal or snack time, they're not full, because then you're going to be having also some challenges there because they don't feel hungry. But obvious thing is you're still providing them with water in between. So that's sort of that water, we need that. But the caloric drinks and the foods in between, this is what we are taking out in between those meals and snacks time. Keeping it consistent. When you say when it's happening and you follow through. So you gave the child a, let's say, a warning or heads up, we're going to be eating, let's say in 5 minutes, to help them with the transition, and that's what you're going to be following through. It's harder, I know it's much harder, and I see it even in my household, when everything is just happening at the home base, because it kind of allows for more flexibility. In one way it's good, in the other way it takes away from that consistency. So try and just kind of keep it consistent, and spanning the 2 to 3 hours. That would help kind of also keep that space in between consistent. And do it sort of, if it's hard to keep the exact same time, so let's say lunch is not going to happen every day at 12. Maybe it happens at 12:30. Maybe it will happen closer to 11:45 or something like that. But maybe keep it event marked. So after, you know, we know that after we do activity X, it's followed by lunch. Or I wake up and I go and have, you know, breakfast. So again, even if your child is, even if it's harder to follow by having a designated time on the schedule, one way you kind of can hit a middle ground is, as I said, attach it to an event that happens daily. So this way they know, when I do this, I'm expecting lunch right after. Then the consistency here helps the child to know that the parent and the caregiver is the one deciding the meal times. So if you're having the child, you know, consistently trying to graze in between the designated meal time, when you are being consistent with the time you're offering, they know they don't have to come to ask you, because they know that there's consistency in mealtime, but they also now know that you're the one deciding, not them. So let's put all the parent jobs kind of together in a more practical way. How does that look? The list of things placed together. So you're choosing and preparing the food. You're offering regular meals and snacks. And then you're making the mealtime pleasant and pressure-free. So we talked about some common pressure techniques used. And we mentioned in the last couple of videos that stress and anxiety will suppress appetite. So you may be able, in that particular meal, to get them to eat just a little bit more. But again, the side effect of that is it's much more harmful, especially if you're looking at it on the long-term effect. So what's going to happen is now the child's going to associate mealtime with stress and anxiety, because they know that they're going to be pressured to eat more or things that they can't handle. And the outcome of that, not only it would affect your relationship and your own mental, you know, health, but it would also result in reducing the appetite of your child. Model how to behave properly at mealtime, and only allow water in between meal times. Now, to the children's role, or, you know, responsibility. They decide how much and if. And that sounds, ooh, okay. Is that true? Go over why we're doing this. We talked about that, but now I just want to bring it together. All things, when we start trying to decide for the children that they need to eat more, or they need to eat this item that they said no to, what ends up happening is we would use one of those following ways. We would either do force feeding, pressuring to eat new food, we would do nagging, or we would try and do like deception, where we're adding things that don't typically mix together and blend in order to hide things that they don't like. But we talked about that over the last couple slides, and also in different videos before, that all of these will have more negative outcomes than the immediate positive outcome that you may see. They will affect your relationship. They will affect your child's appetite, and they would have no control over that. if their appetite is suppressed. It's happening because of stress. And we have experienced that as adults too. When you are feeling stressed, sometimes how we deal with it is we don't feel like eating. And that's the same thing that happens to the child, except that they don't know, or maybe they can't just quite make the connection that I'm feeling stressed, therefore I don't feel like eating. And nagging, and anyone could tell like why nagging wouldn't work. How effective did you find nagging, even with if you have typical child, and typically nagging doesn't really work on the long term, and you feel like you're losing your mind anyways at the end. So it drains you and your child. And again, the long-term outcome is not worth it. And then deception. So the reason why deception won't work, well, actually there are a couple reasons. So let's say you're offering banana bread. Banana bread has banana in it. That's fine. This is not deception. Because that's sort of it's called banana bread. But so if your child likes it, great. So name the things as they really are. But the problem with deception is typically that picky eating child is the one who's able to tell you that something is really off with this recipe. So even though you made it, like let's say you're making pasta and they like this tomato sauce made this way, and then now you're adding mixed stuff. So what happens is, even though to you it's like, okay, the difference is not that great, but to the picky eating child who is already, his sensory reception is heightened, and they are even more sensitive than we are, they can tell the difference quite well, and they would refuse it. But then the next time, here's the second reason, you offer them something that looks familiar to them and they were okay with it, they're going to be doubting, because now it's like, what's in there? Is that the same stuff that I think it is, or did mom change it? Now, they're not doing that up here in the same way I'm doing it now, but they just kind of do it sort of almost like on a conscious level, like they know that now this may look the same but tastes really different, and I didn't like the taste of the last time recipe, so they will just stop eating even the stuff that they like. Now, what does those children's job look like on a more day-to-day level? They will eat. They eat the amount they need. They will learn to eat the food their parents eat, and then they will learn to behave well at the mealtime. And I mentioned that behaving well, I'm not talking about social etiquette in the sense that here's how you hold the spoon, here's how you cut with the spoon and the fork, and the knife. And yes, this comes obviously as part of your social modeling when you're including, but I'm talking more about the negative behavior that you see happening at the mealtime, like spitting, pushing plates away, throwing out the food, and I'm not talking about kids that, oh, I'm exploring the food, I'm playing. I'm talking about in rejecting or avoidance. They're communicating not using throwing and spitting, or pushing the plates off the table. So that's the kind of level of behavior that we're trying to address first before we move on to more like how do you like the social stuff, the more delicate social stuff. So that's the idea of modeling, is to say, what do I do if I don't like food? Or what do I do to be excused from the table? Or what do I do or say when I want this but not that? So those are some of the things, the more foundational skills that you want to start with first. And then you may say, didn't you say in the previous video that the children who are picky eaters may starve themselves? Shouldn't I be doing more than just letting them eat the amount they need? Now, when I said this, I meant it that don't be passive. So sometimes believing that children will eat what they need and they're obviously struggling and leaving it at that, that's when that false belief is going to lead to negative results. But in this situation, you're not being passive. You're going to be letting them for now because you don't want to use, because the only other way you could make them eat now more is to use those negative pressuring techniques, which we said no to, considering the negative long-term negative outcomes. But while you are at the moment biting on your lips, because you're like, oh my gosh, you only take one bite and then you want to leave the table. So they eat the amount they need now, but you know that you are working on their picky eating problems at other levels too. So if your child is seeing, for example, an occupational therapist, and we're working on desensitization, we're working on exposure, we're working on those fine motor exercises, we're actively dealing with the issues, but until we get their skill level up to that competence level where they can manage the food in the amounts they should be eating, we're not pressuring them to eat more at the table. And if you're really concerned about the amount they're eating, you want to A, have the pediatrician involved, and B, seek a dietitian's consult, because they're able to see how much, like how old is your child, how much calories they're getting, and then deciding what other ways based on the food they like that we can put their calorie intake to meet their needs. So I just wanted to highlight that point so you don't feel confused or conflicted. So for this week, parent-child activity, it's going to be practice, practice, practice. It sounds not easy. Okay, so what are we going to practice this week? So this week, I want you to, I know it's hard and busy, but try and observe if you or your child are not keeping the roles of feeding that we discussed. So look, kind of have sort of an idea in your head about the division of responsibility, and kind of start now pausing at mealtime and see what is going on during the mealtime. What are you doing? What is the child doing? Who's deciding what, when, where? And see if you are following that division of responsibility. Now determine which responsibility you have not been following as discussed. So most of the time, there is at least one thing of the division of responsibility that's not being done in that format or according to that model. So kind of look and see if there is one or more of those things that you are not following after you kind of study sort of your mealtime situation, what goes on there, and the dynamics. Now I want you to think about what you need to change to practice the division of responsibility model that we've discussed. So let's say you notice that your child will not eat at mealtime, but they come whining for snacks, or they will try and climb the chair or whatever to reach a particular food item in the pantry and things like that. So what's going on here wrong? What's going on is the parent is losing their role to decide when to eat. So what are we going to do to restore that role to the parent or that responsibility to the parent. And those are the things I want you to think about. What is going on? Who's taking over whose role? And what can we do to restore that division of responsibility in the household? And then once you've made those steps, I want you to take it to practice. So what are we going to do? For example, now I expect a little bit of resistance because that's a change. So it's not going to be necessarily a smooth transition, maybe, but maybe not. So don't be discouraged if you're facing a bit of resistance from your child. So start practicing the division of responsibility model. So now let's say that your child is having, let's keep with that same example, they're having problems with keeping up the 2 to 3 hours sort of time frame. And it's new because they're used to just snacking throughout the day. Now there are a couple things, and they know, for example, they reach to the cereal or the crackers and they know how to get it and so on. So one thing is you could think about is, for example, you could move away those items that are easily accessed by the child. You could also start by maybe narrowing down first the time space between the meals and the snack, and gradually go out to the 2 hour to 3 hour time span in between. So those are a couple of techniques you could think about. Now let's say you're like, okay, I made those observations, I know I'm missing the when or the where, or I'm missing some things in all of the three, but I don't know how to deal with it. That's a very good opportunity for you to reach out to me and say, we've done this, we've noticed that we're not really following the division of responsibility in this particular item. How can we go about it? This is what happens. And that's when we can problem solve together and figure out something that would work for your family system. Okay, so if you have, this is the end, and if you have any questions, please feel free to email me and ask me to set up an appointment so I can call you, or we can do this video call, whichever you will find more helpful, or we can just stick to emailing back and forth, again, whatever your time allows. And I hope you found this helpful, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everyone. Bye.